When Joe Louis dropped brutal digs on Bruce Lee right in front of Chuck Norris, nobody saw Norris's epic clapback coming. It shut the room down in ways you won't believe. Hang tight as we unpack this legendary Dojo Showdown. It's packed with twists that'll keep you glued till the end. October 1978 brought a crisp chill to a Los Angeles dojo in South Bay. One late afternoon, sun filtered onto mats and a dozen eager students sitting in a semicircle, their white GIs pristine and faces calm. Joe Louis stood before them, his massive frame commanding respect even in stillness. At 34, he was at the peak of his fighting career, the undisputed karate and kickboxing champion whose lightning-fast combinations had earned him legendary status in martial arts circles. His dark hair was swept back and his intense gaze moved from student to student as he prepared to share wisdom earned through countless victories in the ring. Today we're going to talk about practical fighting, Louis began, his voice brimming with authority. I want you to forget everything you think you know about flashy techniques and movie magic. Real fighting is about efficiency, power, and speed. A young student near the front raised his hand tentatively. Sensei Louis, what about the techniques Bruce Lee used in his movies? The one-inch punch. And Louis cut him off with a dismissive wave. Look, Bruce was a good friend of mine. May he rest in peace, but let's be honest about what works in a real fight versus what looks good on camera. He began pacing in front of the group. All those fancy Wing Chun trapping techniques, the philosophical approach to combat, that stuff might look impressive, but in a real fight you need direct, powerful strikes. The students exchanged glances, some nodding while others looked uncertain. Louis continued his speech, unapologetic in his rigid tone. Bruce spent too much time on those traditional forms, the intercepting fist, the flowing movements. He demonstrated with exaggerated, almost mocking gestures. Don't get me wrong, he was innovative, but when it comes down to it, a good old-fashioned American karate chop will beat fancy footwork every time, especially in this era. Unknown to Louis, Chuck Norris had entered the dojo quietly through the back entrance along with a young aspiring writer, Rochelle. At 38, Norris carried himself with a different kind of confidence, quieter, more measured, but no less formidable. His friendship with Bruce Lee had been well documented, built on mutual respect and genuine affection. He stood in the shadows, listening to his old sparring partner's critique of their deceased friend. The truth is, Louis continued, unconscious of his audience expanding by two. Bruce reigned in a different time in martial arts, but he was way too slow for modern competition. All that meditation and philosophy can't help you when you're facing a fighter who can throw 3 kicks while you're still thinking about your next move. That was when Chuck Norris stepped into the light. Interesting perspective, Joe. The students turned in unison and Louis spun around, his expression shifting from surprise to a broad grin. Rochelle took notes on the series of events. Louis greeted Norris cheerily, dropping his previous rigid exterior for a millisecond. Just giving these kids some real-world advice about fighting. I heard, Norris replied, his tone neutral but his blue eyes sharp. Mind if I offer a different viewpoint? Your dojo, your rules, Louis said with a shrug, though there was something in his posture that suggested he was ready for a discussion. Norris moved to stand beside his friend, addressing the students directly. Bruce Lee wasn't just a friend of mine. He was one of the most complete martial artists I've ever known. His approach to fighting wasn't about being the fastest or the strongest. It was about understanding the flow of combat and being where your opponent didn't expect you to be. Louis crossed his arms. That sounds poetic, Chuck. But when you're in the ring, philosophy doesn't block punches, does it? Norris asked quietly. Speed without purpose is just movement. Martial arts isn't all about attacking head-on. Somehow, Louis could feel the challenge rising in the air like effervescence. You're missing my point. Deploying speed in fights doesn't add up to attacking head-on. The students watched this exchange like spectators at a tennis match, their heads turning from one martial arts legend to the other. You think Bruce's approach was superior to direct aggressive fighting? Louis continued, his competitive nature beginning to surface. I think Bruce understood that true martial arts isn't about proving who's faster or stronger, Norris replied. It's about understanding the deeper principles of combat. Louis laughed, but there was an edge to it. Come on, Chuck. You know as well as I do that in a real fight, the faster man wins. Bruce might have been philosophical, but his techniques wouldn't hold a candle to the speed of modern kickboxing. The dojo fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic outside. Norris looked at his friend for a long moment, then glanced at the watching students. Tell you what, Joe, why don't we test that theory? Louis raised an eyebrow. You want to spar here now? Unless you're too committed to teaching today, Norris said with a hint of a smile. The students immediately perked up, realizing they were about to witness something extraordinary. Lewis looked around the dojo, then back at his friend. Without a second thought, he agreed. 3 rounds to test if speed was what mattered most in combat. Norris nodded. But let's add a condition, he blurted. No protective gear except mouthguards. Light contact only. Within minutes, the students had moved the mats to create a makeshift fighting area. Word spread quickly through the dojo, and soon other instructors and advanced students had gathered around the impromptu ring. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation as 2 of America's greatest martial artists prepared to face each other. Both men stretched briefly, their movements efficient and practiced. Lewis bounced on the balls of his feet, his hands loose at his sides, while Norris stood quietly, centering himself with the kind of meditation Bruce Lee had taught him. "Ready?" asked Mike Stone, another martial arts champion who happened to be training at the dojo and had volunteered to referee. Both fighters nodded and moved to opposite corners of the mat. The signal for the first round came within seconds. Lewis pushed forward immediately. His legs were a blur as he launched a series of lightning-fast kicks aimed at Norris's midsection. The speed was indeed impressive as his feet moved so quickly they seemed to leave afterimages. But Norris wasn't there. Instead of trying to match Lewis's speed, Norris had shifted slightly to his left, allowing the kicks to pass harmlessly by while he moved into a better position. When Lewis followed up with a rapid-fire combination of punches, Norris deflected them with minimal movement, his hands barely seeming to touch Lewis's attacks before redirecting them. "Come on, Chuck," Lewis called out between strikes. "You're just running away." Norris didn't respond verbally, but his next action spoke volumes. As Lewis committed to a particularly aggressive kick sequence, Norris stepped forward and with a movement so perfectly timed, was suddenly within inches of Lewis's midsection. Then, with graceful force, Norris landed a gentle tap to Lewis's abdomen and threw a light touch to his temple. Both strikes so precise and controlled that they barely made contact, but everyone watching understood that they could have been devastating if contact had been made. Lewis backed off, his expression showing surprise and a flicker of respect. "Time," Mike Stone called, stepping between them. No point was announced. Officially, the round was a draw, but the silence in the dojo spoke louder. Norris hadn't landed hard hits, but his control, timing, and effortless repositioning had told the real story. Both fighters returned to their corners, breathing easily despite the intensity of the exchange. "Not bad," Lewis admitted, rolling his shoulders. "But I was just warming up." "I know," Norris replied simply. "If this dojo drama has you hooked, smash that like button now. It helps us deliver more untold legends." The second round began much like the first, with Lewis trying to overwhelm his opponent through sheer speed and aggressive combinations. This time, however, he mixed in some grappling techniques, attempting to use his size to his advantage and control the match. Norris responded by demonstrating the very principles he had learned from Bruce Lee. When Lewis grabbed for him, Norris seemed to flow like water, neither resisting directly nor giving an unnecessary or unguarded opening. Instead, he used Lewis's momentum and force against him, deflecting his attacks into ineffective positions. Tensions were rising as Lewis changed tactics mid-fall and launched himself into a spinning heel kick, one of his signature techniques that had ended many professional fights. The kick was perfectly executed, his timing flawless, his speed extraordinary. However, Norris simply wasn't there when it arrived. He had moved not away from the kick, but around it, following the natural arc of Lewis's movement until he was behind his opponent. As Lewis completed his spin, he found Norris waiting calmly, one hand positioned where it could have struck a dozen different vital points. "Time," Mike Stone called, a note of amazement in his voice. "Point Norris." The crowd of observers had grown considerably larger, and a murmur of excitement rippled through them. They were witnessing something special. Not just a sparring match between 2 legends, but a clash of different philosophical approaches to martial arts. Lewis was breathing harder now, not from exertion, but from the mental effort of trying to solve the puzzle his friend presented. "How are you doing that?" he asked as they prepared for what should have been the third round. But Norris held up a hand. "Joe, before we continue, I want to ask you something." Lewis gave him the go-ahead, and Norris didn't hesitate. "Do you really think Bruce Lee was too slow?" Lewis paused, wiping beads of sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "Well, I never actually fought him, but based on what I saw, you saw him in movies," Norris interrupted gently. "And in demonstrations, but you never saw him the way I did, training together, pushing each other to understand martial arts beyond just techniques." The dojo had gone completely quiet. Even the traffic outside seemed to have been drowned out. Norris was a proud master of both karate and martial arts. So, his words carried a certain weight, nudging everyone present to key into his understanding. Bruce once told me, Norris continued, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room, that being fast wasn't about moving quickly. It was about moving correctly. He said that if you truly understand distance, timing, and intention, you don't need to be faster than your opponent. You need to be where they don't expect you to be when they don't expect you to be there. Lewis looked around at the watching faces, then back at his friend who was still delivering his speech. For the past 2 rounds, you've thrown more techniques, moved faster, and used more energy than I have. But how many of your attacks actually reached their target? The question hung in the air like a challenge, but not an aggressive one. More like a teacher asking a student. Lewis thought back through the rounds, his competitor's mind automatically reviewing each exchange. The realization that crept across his face was visible to everyone watching. None of them, he said quietly. And how many times did I need to move at full speed to avoid them? Another pause. You never did. Norris nodded slowly. He was no longer talking to Lewis now, but the rest of the spectators, most of whom had been at the dojo for their usual lessons. Norris explained that the highest level of martial arts wasn't about being faster or stronger than opponents, but about understanding combat so deeply that you're always one step ahead mentally. This, he emphasized, made physical speed less important. The silence in the dojo was profound. Lewis stood in the center of the mat, a man who had built his reputation on lightning-fast techniques and overwhelming aggression, processing what he had just experienced. He wasn't too slow, Lewis said finally, his voice carrying a note of wonder. He was moving on a completely different level. You said Bruce wouldn't cope in a modern match, but what makes a modern match? He threw the question back to Lewis, who appeared to be in a minor state of introspection. Aggressive fighting, speed. What has changed in the arts over the decade? Nothing. Sparring is still sparring, and throwing punches hasn't changed in form or definition. Bruce would still counterattack just the same. Norris praised Bruce for always thinking 3 moves ahead in every one of his demonstrations. He developed this ability by understanding principles and not just memorizing techniques. His tone took a deeper dive into nostalgia as he recalled some fond memories with his old friend, along with the moral lessons that came with each recollection. At the end of his impromptu speech, everyone was left speechless. Lewis nodded his head in somber reflection and bowed his head. Chuck, I owe you an apology, and I owe Bruce's memory one too. Norris shook his head forlorn. You don't owe anyone anything, Joe. We're all learning. But Lewis couldn't fight the guilt. He turned to address the students directly and corrected his teaching principles. Everyone has their distinct way of fighting. Beyond this dojo, you can immerse yourself in different patterns and harmonize them to create your own style. On a final note, he advised his students not to be as narrow-minded as he was in approach and speech. Chuck just proved that Bruce Lee's philosophy is practical. Bruce wasn't slow. He only operated from a level of knowledge I couldn't really fathom. His style precedes him even after his death. And I hope it can live on through you in ways Chuck had demonstrated. Norris placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. Deep down, the pair knew Bruce would have appreciated this conversation. Lewis looked around the dojo one more time, taking in the faces of his students and the other observers. When he spoke again, his voice carried less authority and more humility. Class dismissed for today, he said. But I want you all to think about something before next time. Real martial arts isn't about being the fastest or the strongest. It's about understanding combat so completely that speed and strength become tools rather than crutches. The crowd dispersed, leaving the 2 friends to converse as they packed up their gear. Rochelle happily left the dojo, documenting the exchange that would only resurface years later in a sports feature. In the years that followed, both Norris and Lewis would reference that afternoon as a turning point in their own development as martial artists and teachers. They had entered the dojo as champions, defending their different approaches to combat, and left as students, humbled by the very teachings Bruce Lee had been mocked for. Don't forget to hit subscribe and ring the bell for more jaw-dropping martial